Good evening, everyone. Just a quick note to all those arriving. If you are looking for a place to sit, there are plenty of seats over here, and there is a aisle in the middle, so you will not have to push past people as you enter. Thank you all so very much for joining us, both here and virtually on YouTube. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson Booksellers is based in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. For those who have just arrived, there is an aisle in the middle if you don't wish to push through people, or you are welcome to sit in the seats in front of you, whichever you prefer. Thank you all so very much for joining us here tonight. Huge thanks to the folks at Conundrum Books for helping to put together this event, and of course for publishing this book in the first place. We are here tonight to celebrate the launch of Jonathan Dyck's first full-length graphic novel, Shelterbelts. It is such an enormously good book. So this is particularly exciting for us to be here and able to celebrate both in person and virtually. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get the event underway. We ask that while you're in this particular physical space that you remain masked. Once you leave this space for the signing at the end, then masks will not be mandatory, but they will be recommended. So you are free to continue to wear them then as well if you'd like. The procedure for the evening is pretty straightforward. There'll be a reading from Jonathan following my long and winding introduction. And then immediately after that, we'll move along to a conversation hosted by the wonderful Seyward Goodhand. Following that, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. So I will walk around with this wireless microphone. And as it still seems a little unwise for a room full of 100+ people to all share a single microphone, I'll just ask you to please ask me the question, and then I will put it to Jonathan. Now, please note that I will not be able to do justice to the inevitable eloquence of your question. So we just ask that you keep them relatively short and that you keep them as a question. Once you actually meet up with Jonathan at the signing table, rest assured you'll be able to bend his ear and offer all the profuse statements of appreciation that you have in your heart. But right now, we just ask that they be more interrogative when you're speaking to him through me. If you are watching on YouTube, please feel free to write any questions that you might have in the chat, and we'll be sure to put them to Jonathan as time permits. After the event is through, we'll just ask you all to remain in your seat for one moment while we bring Jonathan to the aforementioned signing table. And I believe that is it for procedural notes, although I will be back at the end to remind you of that latter statement. Tonight, to focus on people much more intriguing than myself, your host for this evening is Seyward Goodhand, whose stories have been shortlisted for the Journey Prize and a National Magazine Award, among other prizes. Her first book, Even That Wildest Hope, which you can see on the table to my left, was a finalist for the Margaret Lawrence Award for Fiction and the Eileen McTavish Sykes Award for Best First Book. It was also longlisted for the 2020 Sunburst Award for Excellence in Canadian Literature of the Fantastic. Our guest of honor this evening, Jonathan Dyck, is an award-winning illustrator and cartoonist whose work has appeared in the Walrus, the Globe and Mail, Broadview, and Reader's Digest Canada. Shelterbelts tells the story of a Mennonite community in the midst of defining its future as it reckons with its past through a series of interconnected stories. It's a work of great beauty, great detail, and so much incredible nuance, one that rewards ample attention and many rereadings. So with that in mind, please join me in welcoming Jonathan Dyck.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. That's better. Thanks for being here. It's so good to see all of you, even masked, and I'm grateful that you made it out on this beautiful evening. I I want to say a few words of thanks before I begin the reading. First of all, thank you so much to Conundrum Press, who published this book and saw it in its early stages and was willing to let me fiddle around with it for an additional year before sending it to press, and for all the support they've given me throughout that process. I also want to thank Sarah Entz, who edited the book with me, and yeah, really helped me through some thorny issues in the arrangement of the stories, sequencing things, and I think made it a much better book. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you to McNally Robinson for hosting this and for getting my book out on display right away before I even saw it. I really appreciate that, and I love the service they do for the literary community in Winnipeg. Thanks to the Manitoba Arts Council for an emerging artist grant that allowed me to complete this work. And thank you to everyone who picked up an early edition of Shelterbelts when it was in its gestating form. I was self-publishing these comics in volumes of 3 stories over the course of the last several years. And those early editions were relatively polished, but knowing that I was going to bring them together allowed me to polish them even more and to think about how they fit better. And I was self-publishing and selling those books. So that support meant a lot and gave me motivation to continue. So I really appreciate it. Finally, thank you to my family and friends who helped me out with this and read early drafts and talked to me about it and let me talk to them about it all through the years. This was a long process, but I'm very happy with the result, and I look forward to talking with you more about it. I also want to acknowledge that as a descendant of Mennonite settlers, treaty has made it possible for me to do this work in this place. I'm still learning what it means to live with a history of settler colonialism and its present manifestations, but I'm also learning what it means to live with accountability and working for just relationships here in Treaty 1. So with that, I think I'm going to begin the readings. I'll just leave a moment for John to get started here. This is a little novel, I suppose, for some of us. Comics readings are a bit more complicated than prose readings. I have to show and tell. Just waving to somebody out the window. So I'm going to be essentially, I think she can see the screen. Yeah, so I'm going to be reading my comics as I show them to you, panel by panel. And it's very different than the way the story works on the page. The panels are arranged differently on the page. So here we're going to sort of move through them like slides. But once the screen warms up, we'll get started. Hey, why are you stopping? Somebody just pulled out. Oh man, I guess we should get out of here. Ugh, I hate that place. Hey, Susie, do you have any road pups left? Yeah, for sure. Can you guys at least wait till we're on a country road? I'm going to read the text messages even though they'd be silent. Don't stay too late. You promised the girls you'd read them some Narnia before bed tonight. Kind of stuck, TBH. Well, it never hurts to pray about it, smiley face. Just write the sermon you needed to hear before you met me. Heart, 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 heart. You got this, babe. XO. Yawn. Someone left this bread on the porch. Oh, that must be from Karen at church, Rebecca's mom. I know who Karen is, Dad. That woman is so friggin' nice. I was just thinking about taking a break. Want to play some darts? You're still not done your sermon? So, what are you preaching on tomorrow? Well, the text is from 1 Peter, so I was thinking I'm going to speak about being called out. You got called out? Oh, no, not in that sense. The Greek word used for the early church, ecclesia, it literally means those who are called out, as in called out of darkness and into light. Right. We tend to focus on what we're being called out of, but it's really about what we're being called into. I feel like I've heard this one before. Coming tomorrow? We'll see. Night, Dad. So that was the epilogue. Here we are at the first story, title page. One of the great myths of the modern age is that we are in control of our own lives. But deep down, everyone knows the truth. We're all trapped. You can see it all around you. People trying to escape this reality with drugs and alcohol, promiscuity and sexual experimentation. The list goes on and on. Maybe it's that brand new truck you've been saving for, or that promotion at work, or that family vacation at Disney World. But you and I know that none of these things, nothing in this world will free us. Only God has the power to do that, and he did by sending his son Jesus. Every blessing, every temptation is an invitation to grow closer from God, to grow closer to him. My wife, our kids, this wonderful community, the best parts of my life came when I chose to follow his will and not my own. Romans. It's just too much silence. Hey Dad, my shift ended early, so I went for a walk nearby. I'm at the corner of Spruce and Poplar Ave, no rush. I mean, it's residential and it's a weeknight and there's literally no one outside right now. Hey. Well, it looks like our church just lost another family. It was over the LGBTQ issue. Sorry, I know issue isn't the right word. Did they speak to you directly about it? They talked to several people who all suggested they talk to me. There was a visioning meeting a few weeks ago where someone said we should think about being more explicit in our language, more welcoming to people like your gay daughter. Ha, yeah. And then there was that hymn we sang on Sunday. Oh yeah, the one with the line about loving all genders. And that very obvious rainbow metaphor. Yeah. Kathy, Mrs. Neufeld, called this afternoon to let me know. She was in my office earlier this week and things got a bit heated. I suppose it was her last resort. She said she's certain about where she stands on the issue and just as certain about what the Bible says. I'm guessing it's the only book she's ever read. Well, it's an opinion she's held for a long time. I told her that we have a spectrum of views at the church. But we've all agreed that we can still worship together, that there's enough common ground elsewhere. Susie. Okay, let's do it tomorrow. Sorry I had to cancel. Can't wait to catch up. XOXO. At the end of the day, I'm still their pastor, and I have to balance that with my own personal views. Sounds like you've already decided that you're giving up. You don't need to develop it all at once, especially as more of this farmland turns commercial. The value will just keep climbing. The new skate park is our first priority, but we've also been dreaming about using this area for a coffee shop and potential business partnerships. Well, the land's not cheap and those trees will need to go if you want direct access to the highway. Tap, tap. I'll be meeting with the rest of the pastoral team to talk funding strategy, but we don't want to rush into anything. Thanks to you, the church is really growing. I think God is trying to tell us something. This might be the right time to expand. If we aren't growing, we're stagnating. But it's not just about numbers, it's also spiritual. All I'm saying is you'll need to act fast if you're serious about it. We'll take some time to discern and pray. See you Sunday. Screech. Goddamn whitetails. You're not even supposed to be here. Hey, Jake. Yeah, please go ahead and start on the paperwork. I'm sure I'll be able to bring everyone on board. There's no time to waste when it comes to outreach. God is giving us this opportunity to expand for a reason. So you guys want to cruise around again tonight? I heard there's going to be a fire down at the gravel pits. I'm working at the gas bar tonight, so maybe after I can pick you up. That sounds a bit too late for me. What, you got to be up for church or something tomorrow? Ha, yeah, right. It would suck to be a pastor's kid. At least it's not one of those really conservative churches, like where the women aren't allowed to speak. I like your dad. Seems like an okay guy. Yeah, he tries to be, I guess. Flink. Hey, don't your parents go to one of those churches? Shut up. I better get back to work. Maybe see you later. So that is not all of the first story in the volume. That's about halfway through. But this next story that I'm going to read from is here in its entirety, and it follows right after the first story. So let's start with that. It's called Remembrance Day. And I really enjoyed drawing that image. Felt like I was transgressing something. I'm not sure what. Okay, let's review. Which concept of the great wars of the 20th century put into question? Truth. Tap, tap. Progress. The idea that human achievement in things like technology will bring with it increased prosperity and peace. Snap. An end to scarcity, and with it, an end to conflict. That history moves forward in a straight line. I want you all to think about that this week as we approach Remembrance Day. Who ends up fighting in these wars, and who ultimately gets to benefit from them? Pete. Hey, Judith. Class is going well? Oh, not bad. We're reading The Outsiders right now. Ooh, I love Camus. No, Outsiders with an S by S.E. Hinton. But this time of year is always hard and awkward. This time of year? You know, the Mennonite thing. Right, sometimes I forget where I'm teaching. It's fine. I grew up hearing stories of conscientious objectors from my grandpa. I used to be pretty zealous about it. That sounds so inspiring. With a grandpa like that, I would have been zealous too. I don't doubt it. I'm a pacifist myself, you know. That's great. We'll have to talk about it more sometime. Now, where was I going again? Right, the parking lot. Rick, Deborah. What's going on? Sorry, Corporal Stevens. Please give us a moment. Ma'am. Can we help you, Pete? Well, to start with, you can tell me what these machines of war are doing on the front lawn of our high school. And why it looks like there's a recruitment booth being set up. Pete, calm yourself. This is just part of our Remembrance Day ceremony this year. As you know, Rick, our new English teacher, has served in the military. Dulce et decorum est. He set the whole thing up for us. It was the least I could do, especially considering our country is at war. Our troops need our support now more than ever. It's about time this community started pulling its weight. And yes, I've read Wilfred Owen. But Deborah, you're Mennonite. Pacifism is like the only thing you all agree on. And, you know, distrusting the government. I'm not going to debate this with you, Pete. or a public school. And we're part of a country with military. Yes, this town has a history of conscientious objection. But people here fought in both wars. And those who managed to survive, our veterans, returned to a community that all but rejected them. Thanks for the history lesson, Deborah. Last I checked, the whole point of having Remembrance Day was to counter the glorification of war. You know that is not what we're doing. This conversation is over. Sorry about that, Rick. It's fine. You can't reason with people like that. Assholes. Hey, we should have that chat soon. Yeah, that'd be great. Did you see the front lawn at school today? OMG, yes. Sad face. I'm furious. It's so irresponsible. Click, click. It's been a while. No talent show today, Mr. Davis. Ha, good one. Pete? Hey, Judith. You brought your guitar. Do you play? I used to. Exactly. You're welcome to join me. I'm off to fight the military-industrial complex the old-fashioned way. Got to get out there before the students start arriving. Pete, do you actually think this is a good idea? I wrote my fair share of protest songs during the Bush years. We'll tell them we love them with bombs. Explosions and bullet shells will blow them all to hell. We'll spread the love of Jesus with bombs. Because Christianity only lives in democracy, and democracy is created with bombs. Wall, Mr. Davis, our hero. Woo! This is amazing. The end.
Well, congratulations, John. That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, as I think everyone can tell. And I think a lot of people here have already read the book too, but as you know, it's wonderful. So it's an honor to be here with you to have this conversation. This doesn't feel like your first book. I didn't think so. I mean, I think it's an incredible book. And it's so assured in its subject. It's densely layered and sophisticated as it explores a social complexity and tries to map the totality of this little place. But at the same time, it moves with ease in its storytelling, and it's generous and subtle, immersive, dynamic. It's sort of one of those books you feel like you can drink down as you're reading it. I read it a few times and felt like I was just drinking it down. And that, you know, it's like one of those beautiful sense-making books that helps you, you know, encounter the density and complexity of life, even if your experiences are very different from the ones that are depicted here as mine are. I'm not a Mennonite, maybe that's why you asked me to host this with you, but but I still felt that it did that work for me. So as you can tell from these readings, this is a novel in stories, or a story cycle, set in a fictionalized rural Manitoba town called, and I didn't check this with you, Hespeler? Mm-hmm. Hespeler, okay. And before it was Hespeler, in the fairly recent past, within the memory of some great grandparents of some of the characters in the book, it was a trading post that drew largely Ojibwe-speaking people in Métis as well. And that historical layering was there in the book. And so all of these parts of the book, the individual stories and the storylines and the historical layerings, you know, they add up they create the sense of density and add up to a feeling that the whole is larger than the parts. I guess another way to say this is that you get the sense that no individual person or none of the individual characters have a subjectivity that would be capable of perceiving a large objective reality, but the reader comes away with a sense of that larger vision at the end of reading this. And I think it's you've done just such a beautiful job. And there's even a sense of kind of, I don't know, not mysterious or spooky. There's even a sense that maybe the place that is the town of Hespeler has it starts to emerge as its own entity at the end, and maybe will go on to transcend itself or turn into something else. Who knows? So maybe we'll start sort of broadly thinking about this form, the novel and stories form. So what attracted you to this form?
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Seyward. Whoa, what a gift it is to hear one's work interpreted and described by Seyward. I was attracted to the form partly because I had read a while back a novel by Sherwood Anderson called Winesburg, Ohio, which does something similar with its structure and trying to give a sense of place through a series of shorter narratives, each focusing on different characters. And I was also, so I had that kind of in my back pocket as something I was attracted to and wanted to try, but I was also at a point in my artistic practice where I wanted to try longer narratives. Up to that point, I think the longest fictional comic I'd created was maybe 8 pages. And so I decided to start small, and a 12-page comic, especially writing in fiction, which isn't something I did a lot, felt like a large undertaking. But I did want to move around from topic to topic, and it also became kind of a way to sort of, I guess, get back to ground zero after each story. So I could try something new. But I also, I didn't really want to do like a book with a really kind of dramatic plot.
Right.
I wanted to think through a place, through lots of different channels, and through character rather than plot. So the form allowed me to kind of to approach things more horizontally.
Yeah, I think that comes across. The individual stories, they don't like all the threads don't necessarily come together in a maybe artificially neat way. They kind of, it remains open, and then but the story continues because there's just another place to go in this community. So you kind of move out spatially. Yeah. Why did you call your book Shelterbelts? What's a shelterbelt?
Well, I'm sure it's familiar to some in the audience. Shelterbelts are tree lines or windbreaks that you'll often see kind of bordering farmers' fields, dividing up land. They break wind. It's a weird way to put it, not exactly. They offer shelter from the wind, and they divide up space. They are kind of the visible kind of signals of gridded farmland. Right. And they perform an important function in the landscape. They help manage climate. Of course, provide shelter from the wind. They offer a sense of permanence, a sense of stability, beautification, all these things. And at the same time, they're necessary in the space, partly through settler colonial practices and the disappearance of an earlier ecosystem. Right. So I saw in those trees, and particularly the way they're planted, I guess a metaphor or a symbol that was complex in a way that I thought I could explore. And that's also seemed to lend itself nicely to what I wanted to explore with the different characters and the ways that they're negotiating certain boundaries and exploring certain limits in their community. Yeah, I guess it's a nice symbol. I mean, those trees, now that you describe it, I can bring one of them to mind. And the trees are usually the same kind of tree in a row, right? Yeah. So it's quite,
monospecies.
Right.
Yeah, it's a monospecies, and also very orderly, right? So whatever was there before has been, taken down and restructured. It's a very structured, orderly,
Exactly.
sort of pragmatic way of planting something. And is it a property line too?
It can be.
Right.
Yeah. But no, exactly. I think too, I was attracted to, for those of us who've flown, you get up in the airplane and you see those grids.
Yeah.
And of course, working in comics, I'm working with a grid as well. So
okay, right.
the idea that there's like a visible structure
right.
In the landscape was really attractive to me because I saw this, resonance with the comics page and the way I was structuring narrative.
Okay.
And also, those boundaries are making visible the space of the field. So it's also about, units of meaning and kind of making this visible.
Okay, so you found this kind of correspondence between your home territory and your art form of choice. Yeah, that's wonderful. So you said that one of your inspirations was this Winesburg, Ohio book by Sherwood Anderson, which I haven't read, but it's another story cycle, right? It's a bunch of stories. And that's Winesburg, Ohio is not a real town in Ohio, it's a fictional town. And Hespeler is, for some reason I keep wanting to say Hespeler, but no, Hespeler is also a fictional place. So you could have named this town after a real town in Manitoba, but you didn't. So why a fictional town and not a real town?
Well, I had this feeling that if I said it in a real place, I would, I would get a lot of feedback about how I hadn't captured something accurately.
Right. You fooled everyone.
I know, I fooled everybody. Yeah. No one has a clue. But no, I think it was partly because I wanted to write fiction and imagining a fictional space was easier for the process. But I also didn't want to be bound by the visual, because it's a visual medium. Yeah. That's so much information to keep track of. Right. And that's so much stuff to get wrong.
Oh, okay.
So I could, instead of thinking about like a real community, I could take little bits and pieces, little images from my experience or the places I knew, and I could reassemble them. And I wouldn't have to worry. I didn't have to map things out exactly. People do that.
They do. Yeah, they do. Yeah. Joyce did that with writing about living in France and writing about Ireland. He always get his brother to be like, how many steps from is it from our house to this pub or whatever, and tell me, did you, so you felt creatively free that it wasn't a real place and you could
somewhat. Place is incredibly important in the book. It's still in a real place. Yeah. It's a fictional town in southwestern Manitoba in what's also known as the West Reserve. I very much wanted to write a West Reserve based book partly because a lot of books about Mennonites or fictional books about Mennonites are set in the East Reserve, and coming from Winkler, I thought, okay, I want to give this place its due, but also because the landscape there is somewhat unique. Okay. If you look at old photos, it is a treeless grassland. Right. And so all the trees that you're seeing, apart from some of the forests and coulees, are all planted by people. Right. And to me, that was important to get across. Yeah. Is the East, for those of us who don't know, and maybe for those on online, is the East Reserve like Steinbeck area? Yeah. Like Miriam Tave's kind of territory. Okay. Yeah. So So you're that's right. So you're carving a different space. And what is this set? What is this? So I had the sense that this was quite contemporary, 2022. But then the characters wrote a Weaker Than's concert. Well, John Sampson's playing solo. Okay, but these were some songs from 2000. Are you being slippery with time, or is it contemporary? Was that a concert? It is contemporary, but there's all kinds of slippage, as you witnessed. Yeah. I'm drawing from my own kind of reservoir. Yeah. And in some ways it is a reflection, like these glimpses of youth. These are glimpses of my youth to some extent. Yeah. And that was 15 years ago. So. Yeah. And what about that moment, the moment now, or the moment of your youth? Why, other than the fact that this is formative for you, what is it about this moment that feels so
disorienting for these characters that made you, you wanted to write your stories in that moment?
I think it did come down to kind of wanting to, I guess, encapsulate this moment because of the conversations that are happening
Right.
In Mennonite communities, the kind of renegotiation with Mennonite history,
Right.
with the history of Canada and settler colonialism, but also mediated through various kinds of technology. And I mean, I'm really into popular culture, so I just inserted all kinds of things, lots of books, lots of music.
Yeah, I kept looking at your bookshelf, at the bookshelves, trying to like zoom in. I was like, oh man, my old eyes seem so terribly dated.
Yeah, I really worked hard to get some of the small lettering slightly readable.
Yeah, no, you did. It was good. There's a lot of I guess stagecraft is what it felt like. A lot of like carefully placed objects around the rooms and around the scenes and the frames. And so sometimes I had the feeling I was watching a TV show and also reading a book at the same time. Watching something. And is that something that you feel when you're writing graphic fiction? And is this something that graphic fiction can do that other prose fiction can't? Can it kind of blend modes, or what can graphic fiction do that other forms of fiction can't, and then what can't it do?
Wow, huge question.
Yeah.
I think graphic fiction can do a whole lot. It is very similar to TV, other moving images, especially in the way I presented these stories tonight, that made it all the more like you were watching a show because it was slide by slide for the most part. Part of what attracts me to comics is page design.
Right.
So it's using that grid and assembling the space. Not to name drop or whatever, but Art Spiegelman would say that comics is the art of turning time into space.
Okay.
And so that's something you can do with a page in a way that you can't with a screen. And the stillness and silence of a page and the way the reader can move, you can move the reader through it is really, it's really fascinating and fun to play around with. At the same time, as a reader, you have the opportunity to control your reading speed so you can linger on an image. Whereas, with television or film, you're kind of, you don't have control over the speed at which you're processing the story.
Yeah, I found the pacing really fascinating and also extremely moving. Like it was, you pause and you can reflect on the moment that just happened, and it allows, feelings to sink in. And there's a lot of moments where you pause. So you have characters driving down roads, looking out the window a lot, or looking into water, and you see the water for a few frames, or looking at their phones a lot. You don't always see what's on the phone. Sometimes there's a lot of phones, a lot of ordinary life stuff, a lot of people on their phones. And then the flashbacks too can be quite interesting. You'll have the scene being activated on either side of the page, and then in the middle there's the flashback, and so your eyes kind of bouncing around back and forth in the present, and then the past is in the middle. And it does do this kind of interesting, you feel, I guess, I don't know, the layers of time in a certain moment. But so you're interested in this, how do you use time to convey the feeling you want to get across? And how do you see yourself sort of innovating in your use of time?
Well, I am drawing on a lot of cartoonists who do that really well. Chris Ware is somebody who comes to mind as an artist who's constantly playing with form and exploding moments into very complex histories and feelings. I do really like to pull back, as you mentioned, and explore kind of a quiet moment or break a moment into different images. I hope that slows the reader down. That's my goal. People can tear through graphic novels really quick. And my hope is that, with the right kind of combination of panels, with the right kind of sequencing, I can arrest the reader and pause, cause a little bit of reflection or reframing. But yeah, another thing that comics can do in that kind of page layout is juxtapose past and present,
Mm-hmm.
and do it really abruptly sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes with a bit more flow.
Mm-hmm.
The stories that you mentioned where the flashbacks are housed between the present panels, yeah, that was, I was trying something.
Yeah, that's cool. I thought it was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, you know, I do it in two stories. There's two stories, Better Times and Better Times 2. Very creative titles. And yeah, both have this interesting structure where you know, because I set up the grid in a particular way, I was working in a 2x3 grid, but I had I stuck to a very kind of rigid square subgrid, I guess you would say, where these squares could only be subdivided a certain number of ways. You never see that grid change, and it's kind of me referencing like quarter sections of farmland.
Okay.
A little bit.
Yeah.
At least that's what I was thinking about when I was doing it. But I stuck to that grid for the most part while I was doing this past and present thing, except that middle column interrupts the grid.
Yeah.
And so those gaps, or what we call gutters in comics, are really, you know, they're very pregnant with meaning, because that's where the reader sort of has to do some of the work.
Yeah, they're kind of disorienting. You know, it takes a little moment when you're reading to, first of all, recognize it as the past, and then once you do, you're bopping around between the present, seeing, you know, what the relationship is and whose memory is this. And sometimes it's not even the memory of someone in the scene. You may have like just something else from the past in there. So yeah, it does. It's disorienting in a good way. You know, like you're called upon to do some of that meaning making yourself. And speaking of the way that things are juxtaposed, so I mean, there's also kind of maybe a less stark way that you juxtapose images, and that is possible in this form too, that allows you to have, you know, more, I don't know, thematic meanings emerge. So I wanted to ask a question about, I guess this is a kind of a nature or environment question. I don't know if any of you will be able to see these, but I'll sort of describe them. Or really it's a question about ways of relating to the natural world, and ways that you're showing, you know, possibilities for relating to the natural world. And you're never, okay, so I'll show you two pictures, and you're never as obvious as this, you're never as stark as this. But here's one. Okay, this is the largest picture in the book, and it comes about in the middle of the book. Hold it up. Oh, okay, you can hold it up. And it's a little copse of a treed area on Park Valley, the megachurch's property, being taken apart by machines. The largest picture, and also probably the most violent picture in the book. So you sort of you come upon it and you pause and you look at it. Okay, so that's one.
The centerfold. The
centerfold, yeah. And then the book the book ends with this picture. I'm going to hold that up, and this is a kind of protest that is happening, an Indigenous-led protest happening on some farmland that is protesting against pipelines going in, and there's a little sign that someone has at the bottom saying "Protect the Sacred," but that's not really what your eye is drawn toward in this frame. Your eye is drawn toward the mother of one of the characters coming across the field. It's a moment of reconciliation and a sort of a climax of a plot point. So. But nonetheless, that little "Protect the Sacred" sign is there, sort of off to one side. So, I mean, never are you like holding these two ways of relating to the world up just like this and being like A or B. And actually, I think this, I guess the site of this contest between these different ways of relating to the world, I think happens somewhere else. So this is a moment that really, really fascinated me here. This is the moment where the pastor, Mike Wall, of this Park Valley megachurch goes down to Mexico on a mission trip to build a church, and he is giving a sermon. And as he's giving the sermon, he's like looking at the natural world around him. Maybe hold that up. I don't know if anyone can see it. He's looking at the natural world around him, and there's even a moment where some of that natural world, the sky with the clouds, is reflected in his sunglasses. But as he's looking around at the world at him, he's trying to see past the world, and he's talking about the end of this world, how the next world will be even better than this world. This is nothing. What we see around us is nothing. It doesn't mean anything. What's coming next is far greater. And I thought, like, I was successfully really frightened in this moment, even though it's maybe a soft way of being frightened. But it scared me in this moment, seeing this maybe the darker side of this view. So what are you doing here in this moment by having
Which
yeah, this moment this moment where the pastor of this church goes down, and he's you know, he's also the pastor who's cutting down the trees on his on his property.
Yeah, I mean, it's the story is called Heaven. And I believe, yes, in one of the pages, or in the page prior to this scene with the clouds reflected in the sunglasses, you know, Pastor Mike is saying, our world is so broken and we're all hurting. Part of the good news is knowing that this world is passing away. And that sense of change, I think, is you know, self-evident. There's change, there's disruption, there's violence. But the way we interpret it, you know, it means everything. Whether we see that as a more benign thing, or we see it as part of a fulfillment. But I am ultimately, with this book, trying to think about different relationships to land and nature, and you know, Shelterbelts themselves are, you know, appear as part of nature. You know, that's the world as it appears, and yet they are artificial to some extent. They're planted, they're you know, rectilinear, and you know, thinking through these different characters and how they relate to the land. I am trying to juxtapose some different views. And I'm hoping that yeah, as you said earlier, like the kind of cumulative effect is going to you know, move readers and suggest something perhaps more political or more constructive or reflective. But I think, like, that last image that you pointed out, I like the contrast you drew between the centerfold, which is the destruction of a shelter belt, and the final image, which is Karen walking along a shelter belt on her way to a blockade of this pipeline development. I think does provide a bit of an arc.
Yeah, and these are some of the big sort of the big dialectic, I guess, in the book is this, what is this community going to do in the face of all of this change and all of this newness? And on the one side, you have Park Valley, this mega church, which has appeared sort of recently on the perimeter of town and is attracting a lot of the residents. And that's occupying one side of the culture of Hespeler. And on the other side of the sort of a change that's happening, you've got these emerging socially liberal movements. So characters starting to be aware of settler colonialism, or you've got some queer characters starting to come out, or you've got stories where there's some queer characters who haven't come out yet, who don't feel they can. Both of the queer characters that you foreground the most, Jess and Thomas, are both pastors' kids too, right? And they're, you know, the denominations they're attached to are slightly different, and that seems to affect the way that they feel that they can respond to this part of themselves. But both of these developments, the growth of the mega church and then the emergence of these liberal movements are kind of like young people are really involved, right? So it's not like there is some generational difference and divide in the book, certainly, but also there's this like different path for the future that you're exploring here. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about these sort of multiple, I don't know, maybe it was more than just two possible futures, but multiple possible futures. And what did you want to convey about what it's like to be in a small town and to look past the small town into the wider world?
Well, I do think there are multiple futures at play, but I mean, ultimately, there is a reckoning with the past that is kind of conditioning what kind of future is possible. So throughout these stories, the past emerges, it lingers, it haunts, it's talked about, but it really, you know, how these communities, how these groups and people move forward depends on how they see the past. That's ultimately kind of what I'm trying to do with those different ways forward.
Right.
However, I will say, like, you know, there is Park Valley, the mega church, and the more kind of socially liberal mainline Mennonite church. But there's a third church as well, which is a bit of a creation of mine.
Okay.
you can guess which denomination it is. But the BMF, Bible Mennonite Fellowship. There's probably one of those, in the province over or something. But I don't think it's a binary, I guess is what I'm trying to say. These different versions of progress. And, whereas a church like Jubilee, which is the mainline Mennonite church, has perhaps a more progressive stance on some issues, and Park Valley is, more socially conservative, but more, worldly, let's say. There are churches that embody both, and there are churches that might be more conservative in some ways, and might still, hold a really rigid peace stance, for example, which is quite political given the context and given what's happening at, the high school, for example. What was the second part of your question?
The
small town thing.
The small town, but now that, do you want to answer that? Because I just thought of something else that.
Oh.
Well, answer it. Go ahead. I'll come back.
I do want to talk about the small town thing.
Okay.
Because it does factor in quite a bit, and I think to be I can't call my hometown a small town anymore. It's definitely a city. It's a booming metropolis in some views, but it has changed a lot. I'm still relatively young, I guess, but in the 30 years I've been there, it's changed, it's evolved, it's grown, it's progressed. It certainly has its own narrative of progress that it tells itself. And I think to be from a small town, I still have this small town mentality, perhaps. Maybe it's a bit of a projection or something. But I think there's a self-consciousness that you develop when you're from a small town, especially one that's far away from a major center, and the way you're perceived as someone from there. And I do include Winnipeg in the book a little bit, because I wanted to at least kind of explore that dynamic. There are people who kind of smack talk the small town from the big city, and there's a sense of that city as the place of escape, as the place where the destination, the obvious destination for those who want to live elsewhere. But it is more complex, and I think, again, to bring back this kind of East-West Reserve comparison, another thing I wanted to suggest with this southwestern Manitoba town is its distance from the city. The city isn't nearby. This hasn't become a suburb of Winnipeg. There's still a fairly large gap. You got to drive out. It takes a while, and you don't have the same kind of interplay between the two spaces.
Yeah, you get the sense as you're sort of dramatically, it's dramatic, the moan here, rather than one with like a narrator who's coming in and inflecting it to a larger degree, and so you don't get the sense of where exactly the author falls or where exactly the author sides. And yet there is obviously kind of a pragmatic function that you're after here with these stories. What did you say a moment ago? Wanting to show, or wanting to like present different views, or wanting to show people something, right? Wanting to show people something, if not teach people something. You also have a lot of teachers in this book, right? A lot of the characters are teachers, a lot of the characters are pastors, which allows you to give them an opportunity to like set forth and declare something. And usually there's a lot of dramatic irony around those moments, as I think we saw in your reading. But I wonder what you might, if we can think a little bit about art's pragmatic function, or its pedagogical function, or some people derogatively have said its didactic function. And this was kind of like something people wanted to avoid for a long time in the sort of maybe mid 20th century. Now maybe there's a turn back to this function of art, to art that can have like not an activist strain to it, but that wants to impart something or show something or teach its audience something. And how that function in your work, and not that it's the dominant thing that you're doing, but how that function, how you see it interacting with the more spontaneous impulses at play. So surprising dramatic turns or aesthetic experimentation or expressions of feeling, you know, just things that don't quite fit into a lesson of any. But how do those functions sort of, how do you see that, or do the impulses conflict? Or do they harmonize?
I hope they harmonize. I certainly want them to.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, yeah, like you say, it's quite, it's useful to have spokespeople for certain issues in, you know, as characters in the book, and have opportunities for them to lay out an idea and then explore that idea and complicate it, see it play out. But I think that formal experimentation can have a didactic, or perhaps not didactic, I mean, it's more open, and there's more potential, you know, by sort of juxtaposing things or breaking things up into smaller sequences. But yeah, I do think there's a harmony, and I hope it comes across on the page. What was the last part of your question?
No, I think
I remember it. There was also something my mom said to me when I first showed her. I think it was one of the first stories, and it stayed with me. And I think it's perhaps helped me, like, and it was a great comment. Not to put you on the spot, but she's, you know, she was like, it's a bit preachy, isn't it? And it was a story with a preacher. So, you know, like you can interpret it whatever way you want. But it did cause me to think, like, okay, I have to dial some of this back a little bit, because I don't want just blunt didacticism. And I think, you know, exploring different characters and the way they're working through certain things, the way they're, you know, reacting to events in their lives, or driving in their cars, is also a way for me to kind of temper some of those ideas and some of the, like, some of the climaxes that I've put in the book.
Yeah, I think you succeeded. I think whenever there's been a kind of a conflict or exchange of ideas, and there's lots of them here, there's also moments where just the very deep feelings from those situations sink in. And you've done a lovely and beautiful job of that. So it's probably whatever you're trying to do. It's been very effective. But I've rambled on too much. John came and gave me the sign. So I thought maybe now is the time, if anyone else has questions, that they can feel free to ask them to you.
I'm afraid we are running just a little bit over time at the moment, so we may have to confine our questions to the signing table.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was not meant to be entirely abrupt. If you do have any closing comments you might like to offer, you're more than welcome to do so.
No, John, let's give him another round of applause. I mean, it's a beautiful book. Please go and ask him all the questions that I
would love to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
You know, don't hold back.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we will be moving along to the signing in just a moment. We'll ask you all to remain seated for just one moment while we transport Jonathan over to the table. After that point, you may all wander over there and have a copy of the book signed. We have copies behind the cash desk. There are copies at the signing table. Please do feel free to get a copy signed before you pay for it. Just please do pay for the book at some point this evening before you hit the parking lot. Thank you all so very much for coming out tonight, both here physically and of course virtually. The video of this event will remain live online if any of you would like to revisit it or share it. And I'd just like to ask all of you to join me one more time in thanking Conundrum Press, the fantastic host for this evening, Seyward Goodhand, and of course, Jonathan Dyck. Thank you all so very much.